Welcome to the Queer Love Podcast, the silly and serious shenanigans of two queer relationship coaches. I am your host, Elizabeth Cunningham.
And I'm your host, Lee Greeps.
On this podcast, we talk about how to live your best queer life with fulfilling, healthy relationships and anything else that makes your little queer heart happy. Because living your life outside of the heteronormative scripts is totally possible for you.
Each episode, we explore all things queer love from our professional perspective as relationship coaches, our own personal experiences, and as partners.
If you love our show, follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter at Queer Love Relationships. You can also check out our website, www.queerloverelationships.com.
Thanks for following us and enjoy this episode. Oh man, boundaries have been broken. And then especially if you start telling people like, yeah, they broke my boundaries or they crossed my boundaries, then all of a sudden there's even more weight to the situation because now everyone's like, oh my God, well their partner crossed their boundaries. They did this thing. That's like, it's their fault. Da, 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 da.
All right. Welcome to the new and possibly improved.
Possibly.
I don't know if it needed improvement, I guess. The remake. Guess who's back again?
Oh, we're all the things that can be said.
We're all the things that can be said. The Queer Love Podcast. Woo! You know, we're so staying together.
Oh.
Woo!
I don't know.
I don't know. We didn't plan that. We were ill prepared, actually. You know,
that checks out for us being like, oh yeah, it's the new thing.
Oh yeah, we're doing a new thing. It's a new thing now, actually. So we changed the name. We changed the name from the Queer and Poly podcast to the Queer Love Podcast. Why did we do that? Strong start.
I'm like, wait, why did we do this? We did it because we're just gaying it up more. I don't know. You say it. You say them good words. That's my answer. Because I had a big secret agenda to gay it up. So
excellent. Lee had the secret gay agenda. Sounds about right.
Yep.
For the masked lesbian. Was that not working? Okay.
You were happen.
Well,
I want to see your full pretty face.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. Yeah, so Lee's secret gay agenda. Also, yeah, what we wanted to do was to expand. So instead of like queer and poly is very niche. Which was one of the reasons why we did that actually in the first place.
Right.
Was because we were like, oh, like we want to talk to this like subsect of people and we want to talk about queer and poly stuff. And as we have grown as relationship coaches and also just as people,
yeah.
What's been really apparent for, I mean, I'll just speak, I will definitely just speak for me. But what has been really clear for me is that I really want to expand into like queer relationship spaces and not just queer and poly, but like if you are LGBTQIA and want to have a healthy relationship, that you have resources. Because just like in, you know, queer and poly spaces or just polyamorous spaces, you know, there is actually, I would argue that there might even be more of a lack of resources in LGBTQIA plus spaces than there is in poly or non-monogamous spaces, especially in the past 10 to 15 years. There's been so many resources created for polyamory and non-monogamy, including, you know, in the work that I've done in these past 7 years, 8 years.
Amount of years.
amount of years. There's been so many resources that have been created, and what we really started to see more of a need for in our work and with our clients was really in just the more broad, like queer dating, queer relationship space. And more people have been coming to us with questions about sexuality, about gender, about how do I date in the queer space. I've never, people who are just coming out either as gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, and they're like, I don't even know how to like date or be. And also, in our with our like professional connections and colleagues, a lot of people have been um, requesting, asking, getting excited about the possibility of us having more queer resources because that's also something that they find lacking
Hmm.
as well. And so this is something that we already do. So we thought that we would broaden it out. So we're not it's not like if you're polyamorous and you're listening to this or you're non-monogamous and we're no longer speaking. That's not what this is. It's more of an expansion. And we want
You
to,
will still be captured.
yeah, we're still going to talk
Because
about,
queer
yeah,
people
yeah.
can be poly.
Yeah. We're obviously still going to talk about all sorts of different relationship styles. But that's also what we're expanding it out to. So it's queer dating, queer relationships, and we're going to be talking about all sorts of different relationship styles, but mostly focusing on like what are the challenges that queer people face? What are the hurdles? What are the questions? What are the things that you need? Because also similarly to non-monogamy, there is kind of this like blank script,
Hmm.
there is not the heteronormative script. There's this like blank canvas. And so when you're looking at a blank canvas, how do you create whatever you want to create? And I feel like, inside of this is the last thing that I'll say because I feel like I'm getting really wordy with this. But like one of the things that's been coming up for me in these past 6 months is this idea of relationship artistry and like teaching people how to be creative in their relationships. Because one of the things that I see that doesn't work in, especially in what I've seen in some of the resources that have been created for polyamorous people or non-monogamous people generally, broadly, is that people have created things where they say something like, this is the right way to do it, or
Hmm.
other ways are wrong or lesser or bad.
Hmm.
And so rather, instead of helping people be creative and really be able to make those autonomous decisions for themselves and giving people the agency and trusting people's integrity, like I think it's just a lack of trust in other people's integrity that has people say things like this is the wrong way to do it because they're like, oh, well, if you do it this way, then probably you're going to be a bad person.
Hmm.
And instead of trusting people's agency and autonomy and integrity, and like trusting that like part of the learning process is making mistakes and part of growth and part of creativity is learning from your mistakes, that we're robbing people of that opportunity to be a relationship artist, as I am putting it. We're robbing people of that opportunity to be a relationship artist if we're giving people a paint by numbers and being like, this is how you're supposed to make a painting, rather than being like, these are the principles of painting. Let's experiment with that. What do you want to do with that? What's beautiful to you? What works for you? And then operating inside of those parameters. And again, like trusting people to make mistakes and trusting that they will learn and grow and not make those mistakes again. And yeah. So I think also in creating resources like this, I think it's really important to stress that this is really about like who you get to be and learning things that are more inside of the lines of like principles rather than rules, right? I hope that that communicated.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Mhm.
I'm all, I'm all for the queers.
Yeah.
So I'm so stoked for this. Oh my God.
Lee is here for the queers.
Oh, here for the queers. No, I mean, obviously, like this is my my fun zone.
hmm
So I am like, yes, more resources. Because yeah, that is very lacking for queer folks, regardless of like relationship style and everything. So yeah, just being able to broaden that out so that we can actually help more of the queers.
hmm Yeah, and I think that in making this change that we're also being able to help more people.
Hmm.
That's my thought behind it as well. Is that in that expansion, there's more opportunity
Yeah,
for people to like feel seen.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, for
More
sure.
queers. More queers.
More queers, more queers, gather to us.
Oh my God, yes, that is the ideal. Come along, you queers.
Yeah. I when I first came out at 29 and I when I came out as at 29 I came out as like I mean I guess I more said queer. I think I used the word pansexual because it felt like it was the most descriptive of me at the time.
Mm.
But I was at at a place. I was at a place with a friend of mine and I was like they were about to leave and I was like, "Oh yeah." They were like, "Okay, I'm gonna head out." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm calling a family member of mine and she's also gay." And as she was walking away and she was like, "Why? Because you got to tell them that you're a homo."
It's so good. I love the queers. Um,
And I just thought that that was because she said it as she was walking away. She like yelled it back at me. In
this is
in this
queer
like
love.
semi-public
Yeah,
place.
like see this is queer love. This is why I love us.
Oh, it is. It's great. It's fantastic. So, with all of that being said, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about how boundaries get weaponized.
Yes,
I mean, in
they
relationships,
do.
but like, particularly in yes, non-monogamous spaces.
I feel like in particularly non-monogamous spaces, what boundaries get weaponized because it's just this word that's been like co-opted
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot
without
of
us.
words.
There's a lot of oh, that was something that I was gonna look up before we started. Was there's a phenomenon, there's an actual word
Mm.
that is for when you have a like very specialized word, like whether that be like a word that's more used in therapy or a word that's more used in like legal jargon or something like
Yeah.
that, like wherever the
Yeah.
specialty comes from, but then it gets picked up by more like layman's
Yeah.
terms. And then that word goes through this transition of kind of losing its meaning.
Right.
And can either be weaponized and or just doesn't hold the same weight that it
Right.
does.
Yeah, it's like watered down.
Yeah, but more it goes through this the phases that it goes through is being used wrong, being weaponized, and then it being watered down and then needing to use a different term or new terms because
Hmm.
that term just doesn't hold the same weight or meaning as it did previously. And so
Yeah.
I think boundaries is definitely one of those words in relationship spaces in general, but I definitely think in non-monogamy, where it's at the weaponized phase
Mm.
because it is kind of this trump card right now of like if you say something like, "Oh, well, they crossed my boundaries." Now all of the sudden, like whoever you're talking about is the bad person.
Yeah, like
Regardless, and you do and it's also like when something is weaponized, you can't, it's almost like you can't ask for specifics around the thing. It's like if you're asking for specifics, then you're asking the quote unquote victim to like prove their
yeah, like you don't believe
stance.
them,
Like,
and then
yeah,
you're part of the problem,
right,
and yeah, like so, and then because then it just leads to like the lack of responsibility and accountability for things, you
right.
know, and it because it's like I mean, especially if I mean, I think most of us have had it used against us in some
In some
capacity,
capacity,
right? And
yeah.
it's not even like maybe
Whether it's
in
like,
relationships,
yeah.
like, you know, partner relationships, but it could be like work relationships or, you know, just people in general of like, oh no, you crossed my, and you're like, what are you talking about? Like, and it's, and then, but then you kind of feel like, well, I can't say anything because then it's like,
Because now I'm the bad
yeah, like, and
guy.
it's,
Like
well,
I
it's
did
like a
something
weird,
wrong.
yeah, it's like a
Like,
weird, yeah, like you said, it is a trump card where it's like, well, now I can't say anything.
right. You like put the position, you've put the situation into like a stalemate, basically.
Yeah, like you just, yeah, you've used the weapon when there was
Mhm.
no weapon needing to be used in this
Right.
situation.
Right.
Um,
And it
yeah.
can be understandable, like maybe you feel backed into a corner, you know, like so I want to like give compassion to the person who is using this as a weapon. Maybe you're not meaning it maliciously. Maybe you feel backed into a corner, maybe you feel really hurt and wronged. Maybe you're having thoughts like, well, they should have known, which if you're ever having thoughts of they should have known, you had some expectation that they probably didn't know,
Mhm.
right? Like so taking the case, but that's a separate conversation. Um uh, well, anyway.
I'm like, it's like, I mean,
It's
it's
part of
part
it.
of
It's
it
definitely part of
because,
it.
like, I mean, you also, I mean, I feel like,
More like I just didn't want to go off on that point. I didn't want to derail myself. That's why I said that.
well, I think it's, I mean, I think first to begin,
Let's define boundary.
it's exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like,
What is actually a boundary? What
what,
does it even
what is your
mean?
definition?
My definition of a boundary, I think where I go to is more inside of like a trauma informed lens. So like a boundary would be something that um denotes like where your growth edge is
Mhm.
on something. And a boundary is also something that is for you and only for you and your behavior and communicates to another that what works for you. And if you are not, and it also communicates to them that if the situation becomes unworkable for you, what the action is that you will take,
Mhm.
right? So it is, a boundary is all about you,
Mhm.
right? So the classic example is if you yell at me, I will remove myself from the situation because it doesn't work for me to be in a situation where I'm being yelled at, or even if it's you're not yelling at me, if there's yelling involved at all,
Mhm.
I'm going to remove myself from the situation because it doesn't work for me to be in a situation where there is yelling.
Mhm.
Right? So you're not controlling the other person's behavior. You're not telling them what to do, what they can do, when they can do it, who they can do it with. You're not dictating their behavior at all. You're just clearly communicating what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and what you will do if something gets to like a specific point, a specific edge of what doesn't work for you.
Mhm.
Right. So more, I'll pause there actually.
Mhm.
I was going to give another example, but I think that was pretty clear.
That was pretty.
Yeah. Tell me your definition of boundary.
Yeah, I was trying to think of like a different one aside from that. Like, I mean, in that vein, but like, I mean, because what you may have heard of boundaries as like it's like where I end and you begin kind of thing is kind of another similar or like a common way that people describe boundaries.
Mhm.
But I also like to see it as just like it's boundaries are like the pathway to loving someone in a way that actually feels loving and like safe for them.
Mhm.
So like just following that same premise of like the way to love that person in a way that feels loving and safe to them is to not be yelling around
Right.
them, right? And so it's
It's to
like,
use a tone other than yelling.
yeah, and it's like, okay, so and so knowing that and knowing that what, you know, what they will do is just leave, then it's like that's that they have communicated to you that this is how what they need in order to feel loved and safe. Like in relationship, right? And so, you know, I think about it in that way of like it's just it's the pathway to loving someone,
Right.
in the ways that feel good
Yeah.
and works. And because I think the other like I like that kind of way of looking at it
Hmm.
because like in that it's also we always focus on the no. Like
Right.
boundaries are no, but boundaries are also yes. Like it's like
Right.
I am saying yes to this kind of volume. I
Right.
am
I'm
saying
saying yes to difficult conversations. Like
right,
I
like
am here for difficult conversations. I'm here for the discomfort. Like I'm here to work through it with you. And if those difficult conversations turn into yelling conversations, then I'm out. And doesn't mean I'm out of the relationship, but it means that I will remove myself from that situation until we can come back and talk about it or do whatever works, right? Yeah. I also think about it like in the visual that I get is a river through a mountain. It's like the what works is the river. Like that's the flow. That's the flow of love and the relationship. And the mountain and the banks of the river are the boundaries, right? So it's where the flow is. Boundaries create the flow. Yeah. And so anything else that you want to share about that? I feel like I cut you off.
I don't know where I was. I, we'll keep going. Yeah. I was like I was gonna say something, but I can't remember. So
I'm
I was
sorry.
like, what was it? Now we'll go with it.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
So how do boundaries get weaponized?
Um, but boundaries get weaponized. I mean, because it's you'll it's more of like the control or like the manipulation tactics that it kind of and manipulation being like it's not necessarily like even being intentional in like manipulation, right?
Mhm.
But it's the thing of controlling others, like as opposed to, you know, I'm gonna remove myself should you be yelling, right? It's like you can't yell, right? Like you can't do this thing, you can't until you're trying to control the behavior of another versus like being like this is what doesn't work for me and I will control myself because that's all I can control.
Mhm.
And so then, you know, we when it comes to like this when we say oh boundaries are like what I'm a no to or whatever it is, then you know say in the instance of like I am a no to you know, some sort of experience of you dating someone else or whatever, or this person, or over here, you can't go to that restaurant. That's a boundary for me because that's our restaurant. Like, whereas like it's just we use that term because it's like because it's something of like, well, I'm not being respectful of someone's boundaries. Like that means something bad about me, right? And so then that's how it gets weaponized because when that term gets brought up, and then especially like in a way that is not actually honoring the definition of boundaries, then it's you're just using this term that does carry a lot of weight to it, especially in relationships, and to do it in a way that is controlling, is manipulating, is limiting, and it's more of a rule that you're putting on someone versus like
And then using the word boundary.
yeah, and you're just that's the thing. It's like you're using like you're you know that it has a lot of weight, you know that it has a lot of charge to it when it comes to relationships and like how people want to be like no one wants to be the person that's like, oh yeah, I just cross everyone's boundaries. Like so it's like you know that and so then you'll go,
Even subconsciously.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so then you'll go, this is a boundary. Like I was a no to that, right? Or you know, they did this thing that I didn't like, therefore they crossed my boundary.
Mhm.
And so you'll, you know, we just insert boundary into the way that we're talking about it, and then it does it just like it lands so heavily because everyone's like, oh man, boundaries have been broken. And then especially if you start telling people like, yeah, they broke my boundaries or they crossed my boundaries, then all of a sudden there's even more weight to the situation because now everyone's like, oh my God, well that their partner crossed their boundaries. They did this thing. That's like it's their fault. Da, 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 da. And then because that term has been used, it's like it's so hard to work around or even talk about because
Mhm.
it's the example of no, this is a boundary, right? And so no one wants to like
Mhm.
be like, what are you talking about? That wasn't a boundary. Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
And so it makes it hard to actually even be open to a conversation around it.
Yeah, exactly. And this is also like in the course that I created and that we're also rebranding and recreating, but we'll be talking about that. Um, but I talk about the difference between agreements and boundaries, and then the difference between like agreements and boundaries and rules
Hmm.
versus rules, right? Because like I think oftentimes people get people make an agreement and then they call it a boundary, right?
Hmm.
Like using the example of like, our favorite restaurant, right?
Yeah.
You can make an agreement with your partner that's like, hey, like, can this just be our place?
Hmm.
Like maybe you've been going there with this person for years, the whole wait staff knows you,
Hmm.
like it really is like it's your place,
Yeah. Something
and it's
special.
something super special between you and your partner in relationships, and there's other restaurants that you can go to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so then you can make an agreement with your partner, that's like, hey, can we agree that like we can go to any other restaurant
Other
with
partners.
other partners, but like this is just our place.
Hmm.
And then if they agree, then that's an agreement that
Yeah.
you've made. And now both of you have that agency with your own behavior. You're agreeing that this is the behavior that I'm going to, agree to,
Hmm.
right? And so you're not controlling the other person's behavior. You've both agreed that you're both going to act this
Yeah.
way,
So that
right?
would be breaking an
So that
agreement.
would be breaking an
Should
agreement,
they,
right?
should they or you go to that restaurant with another partner?
Right.
It's not like you broke my boundary or you crossed my boundary. It's like, oh, which again is like very hurtful to break the agreement.
It's very
Obviously,
hurtful, yeah.
it's hurtful, but that's not a boundary.
Right.
And so then, especially if you said you broke the boundary, then it's
Right.
like, oh God, right? Versus
Yeah.
like, no, 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 you broke the agreement.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think that often gets confused, and that's a way in which boundaries can then become weaponized
Hmm.
because we're using the term boundary when we actually mean agreement.
Hmm.
Right. Because that involves both people saying that they're going to do this particular behavior,
Right.
where the boundary is like, no, this is the behavior that I'm going to do.
Yeah. Should this
Should
happen?
should this happen? Should this thing that like doesn't work for me happens,
Hmm.
right? Where it's like if it were a boundary, it's like, my I don't but that doesn't even work. It doesn't even work with the restaurant
It
analogy because
doesn't.
because you're controlling someone's behavior.
Yeah.
Like it
Like,
doesn't like if I said, hey Lee, it's a boundary of mine that you never go to this restaurant. I was gonna use one of our restaurants.
yeah, I
Yeah.
know where you're going.
You can never go to Lucky's Pho with any other.
I would never even do that.
Yeah.
I would like be like, no, that's our special place. I would never do that.
But if I said I was like, you can never go
Mhm.
to Lucky's Pho on a date with anyone else, and that's a boundary of mine. It's like I'm dictating
What I can do.
what Lee can do. Like that doesn't even work. There's not a scenario in which that's not trying to control someone else's behavior
Yeah.
unless we're both agreeing to it. Unless we were both like,
Yeah.
yeah, like we agree that Lucky's Pho is like our spot and we're not gonna go on a date with anybody else there, which we should make that agreement, by the
Great.
way.
With shake on it,
Shake on
partner.
it, shake on it. Unless permission is given. It's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh man, Lucky's is the only. No, we would never.
No,
That would
I'd
never
be
be a
like, well, I
thing.
guess you're starving today.
But that would be weird to take somebody
Oh
else.
my
I
God,
would feel
no.
so weird about
I
that.
wouldn't. I couldn't. I'd be like, no. I'd be like, oh, you want to go to Lucky's? Well, Elizabeth is coming with us. Now it is a
Now it is a we're the whole crew is going
yeah.
now.
Now
Yeah,
it's
for
not a
sure.
date
It's not a
just with
date
us.
anymore. Yeah.
Be like,
Ah, that's funny.
yeah.
But I'm hoping that like you can our silliness aside, um, uh,
But no, that's a good
that's a
example
really good
because that's a
example.
very common one
Super common.
of like you
Yeah.
can't do this. Da, 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 da. Like
Right.
if you're starting off with you can't do this, like that's not a boundary. And it's also not an agreement either. Like an
Right.
agreement is like, hey, you know what? Lucky's is so like special to me and you, like having you there and like our time
Mhm.
on our date nights, and
Right.
it's so
The whole
amazing.
staff
They
knows
all
us.
know us, and
Yeah.
like there's just and it's just like, oh my God, like I would really like it would mean so much if we would agree that like, yeah, we're not gonna take any other dates there, right? Like
Yeah.
unless, unless we agree upon it
Unless we change it
at
at
that point
some,
in
yeah,
time,
at
right?
some time down the road. Yeah,
Right.
for
But it's
sure.
like I would just, oh, that would mean so much if we could agree upon that. Like, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely.
That excellent.
Absolutely. That would be weird. I'm just thinking about walking in there on a date with someone else. I immediately feel uncomfortable just thinking about it.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I like can imagine like some of their faces, like be like, who is this? What's happening?
Yeah.
And it's not even like a polyamorous thing. It's just like I don't know, it's just a vibe thing.
Yeah. So,
Uh,
but that's how you open up the conversation for an agreement
right.
again, because it's, because if I'm saying you can't do this, that's
Hmm.
me putting a rule upon her.
Right.
And also it's like, what am I doing? I don't put rules upon anyone. Like I'm not,
Right.
if I was a
Yeah.
teacher again, well then I have the rules of the classroom, but
Yeah. And it's also, and what I, how the other way that I see people weaponizing boundaries is that they kind of even subconsciously like recognize that it's a rule. So they try to, they're like, oh, well, I want this person to behave in this way. Like another common one is like, you can't date people of this specific gender. Like a lot of
Mhm.
times it happens with
Yeah.
like cisgendered men don't want their cisgendered, you know,
Female.
woman
Yeah.
partner to date other cisgendered men,
Right.
right? And so like in trying to find a way to make it sound like a boundary, then they'll say something like, oh, well, it just like, the only reason that we're opening up the relationship anyway is because you're exploring your queer side. So we don't even let's just leave, cisgendered men off the table,
Mhm.
right? And then that like kind of subtext
Mhm.
is like you can't
Mhm.
date other men. And then when that may end up eventually happening, then they're like, oh, well, I thought that we agreed
Mhm.
that you only date, you know, in the queer space and not have any other like hetero presenting relationships. I thought we agreed to
Mhm.
that. And it's like, did we agree? Or did you just like very subtly, like, can you hear like the indirectness of that,
Mhm.
right? Where instead of having like a direct conversation, like a direct ask of like, okay, we're opening up our relationship. What does that mean? Who do you want to date? And having the direct thing of like, hey, are you going to date other men? And then if that makes you uncomfortable, then you as in the man in this
Mhm.
situation, if that makes you uncomfortable, then examining your own discomfort around that
Mhm.
and not automatically trying to control, your partner's behavior. I want to use a different example because I feel like it's easy, especially in like the queer and non-monogamous spaces, it's easy to see why that's problematic, because of like the heteronormativity of it.
Mm.
Um, However, like there are other circumstances where we don't fully say like what we're uncomfortable with. That also happens in relationships with women or AFAB people, where the other one wants to date men or
Hmm.
an AFAB meaning identified female as at birth, and AMAB meaning
Assigned male.
assigned. I was like, not identified.
Mhm.
Assigned, thank you. Assigned male at birth. So it can also be that as well. So there can also be things around gender that make you uncomfortable. There can be things around sex that make you uncomfortable. Like, it makes me uncomfortable that you're going to like have oral sex with other people or
Mhm.
something like that. And you have to look at it from all angles. Like you can't just put a boundary around something that makes you uncomfortable just because it makes you uncomfortable,
Yeah, that's I was gonna
right?
say like because just like on that note, it's just another way that boundaries get weaponized is
Right.
like people will take the language of this, right? So if you know, oh, boundaries, like, oh, I'm a no to that. So it's my
So
boundary,
that's
right?
my
Right.
boundary,
Like it's
right?
I'm a no to yeah, I'm a no to you having, oral sex with anyone or oral sex with dudes, right? Like it's like if that's kind of like, your discomfort and you're like, yeah, that doesn't, if you do that, then what I'm going to do is get crazy upset and we're not going to have sex for, however many months of time or
I've had someone say, if you do this specific sexual act, I will not have sex with you for 3 months.
so there you go. So like that would be, it's using the framing of a boundary, right? Of like if you do this, if you yell, then what
Right,
I'm going to do is remove myself. If you have sex in this way, then I'm not going to have sex with you for whatever many months or whatever it is,
right,
right?
right.
And so then it's like, oh, well, see, you crossed my boundary, therefore now, boop.
Right. Instead of looking at like, because let's take the yelling example versus the sex example.
Hmm.
That's a great comparison. So, like with the yelling example, it seems almost so obvious that it's subtle enough that you don't even catch it,
Hmm.
of just like why yelling makes you uncomfortable,
Hmm.
right? And so it's like, why yelling makes me uncomfortable is that it's aggressive, it's unproductive,
It feels unsafe.
it feels unsafe, right? Like, and I want to have, safe
Hmm.
interactions with you, and I don't want to be subjected to yelling,
Hmm.
right? And yelling is something that the other person is doing that is a behavior that doesn't really work for relationships in general,
Hmm.
right? Like it's not like a quote unquote bad behavior. Like most people have yelled at
Right.
at some point
Yeah.
in their life. But we all know that that's not a behavior that works if we want to have healthy dialogue
Yeah. And like
about
people
something.
feel regulated and yeah.
Right, having people feel exactly. So like, so we know we can look at this behavior of yelling and see all of these ways in which that isn't a healthy or productive behavior, and why the other person would be like, I'm just going to remove myself from the situation if you yell. Whereas we look at like, again, maybe taking like the oral sex thing
Hmm.
as an
Hmm.
example, right? Like I'm not going to sleep with you for 3 months if you have oral sex with someone else.
Hmm.
Okay, now we're looking at oral sex.
Right.
So oral sex in and of itself is not unhealthy behavior.
Right.
Like that's a pretty normal, natural thing to do in a relationship between two people who are sexually active with each other, who want to
Consent.
who consent, who are both adults, who want to do these things, et cetera, et cetera. Like that's a pretty normal, healthy behavior. Like there's
Hmm.
nothing like unhealthy necessarily. Like there's risks involved.
Right. But
There's
yeah.
risks involved with oral sex, but oral sex is not going to lead to the detriment of someone's like mental or physical if everyone is consenting.
Right.
I can hear all the people being like, these are all the ways in which oral sex is terrible, blah 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 blah. Okay. If everyone is consenting, everyone is enthusiastic, everyone is a yes, da 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 da. Oral sex is like a perfectly normal behavior, right? So the person who's setting this quote unquote boundary, like that is pause for you to be like, okay, what is the thing for me to look at here that makes me so uncomfortable about oral sex?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's valid. Whatever makes you uncomfortable about that is valid,
Mm-hmm.
but that's also yours. And that's yours to unpack and work through. And maybe you do that with your partner, and maybe you make an agreement that's like, hey, while I'm working through these things, like, can you not do that until I feel comfortable? Like,
Mm-hmm.
can you give me,
Or can you give me like, yeah, 4 months to work on it with my therapist,
right?
and like in that time frame agreeing not to have oral sex with anyone else.
Yeah.
And then at 4 months time we talk about it again, or and like,
Yeah.
part of the agreement is I let you know of where I'm at,
Right.
each month or whatever it is,
Or
right?
something like that. Or you do other things with your other partner. And so then um maybe I start to get more comfortable just with the idea
Mm-hmm.
of like you being with other people. Because again, like, yes, in an ideal world, when you open up a relationship, you just understand these things. You're just like, yeah, that's totally normal human behavior, blah, 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 blah. But like, we are emotional creatures. We come with trauma and baggage and biases. And so it is also okay for you to have to take time
Mm-hmm.
to be comfortable with something, but it's also recognizing that it's your discomfort that you're working through and it's not actually on anybody else
Yeah.
or their behavior to help that's not the right word to cater
Mm-hmm.
to your discomfort indefinitely,
Mm-hmm.
right? When we're all adults who want to have different types of relationships. And that's what we've agreed to. We've agreed that we're open to, different types of relationships,
Mm-hmm.
right? And different types of activities and blah, 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 blah. So being able to recognize that it is your discomfort at play here and what to what degree are you responsible for your discomfort, right? So it's uncomfortable to be yelled at, but yelling is not really a healthy behavior in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to, I'm going to remove myself from a situation that's unhealthy versus oral sex makes me uncomfortable, but oral sex is a pretty normal behavior in relationships. And so what is it about that that makes me so uncomfortable?
Mm-hmm.
And what do I need so that I can work through that? Because if I want to be with this person and they want to have oral sex with other people, then this seems like something that I'm going to need to work through,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Just nods.
Yeah.
Anything
I'm like, yeah, you laid it down.
else that you want to share about boundaries?
Mm. No, I think I mean, I guess it just comes back to like what we started with at the top of like really just with these kinds of things, just talking about what boundaries mean, with partners, and and even like, you know, if you feel like someone is weaponizing boundaries against you in some regards, just being curious around that. And it's like being like, oh, like what, you said that I crossed this boundary, like what was the boundary, so I can kind of more understand what was going on. I think we also will get weird about asking what the boundary was. And this is in general, like people are like, oh, they say what's the boundary. I should just know the boundary, like whatever it is. But it's like getting curious of like, oh, like I'm really sorry that was hurtful, and I want to be able to better understand. Can you share more with me about like what the boundary was here that feels crossed? And to be able to talk about that. And again, obviously that means the other person is willing to talk about that. But that's kind of the challenge when it is getting weaponized or just used in an incorrect way, is that that's what makes it a weapon, is that it kills the ability to have a conversation about it, right? Like it just like that's what it's crushing out of possibility.
Mhm.
And so just being able to approach that in a way that does lead to dialogue, and then, hopefully, and maybe that looks like going, being in a therapy session with your partner talking about this, right? If it's like we need a third person or
Mhm.
something of that nature. If you're like, yeah, I asked them about the boundary and they were like, you should know, da, 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 da. I can't believe you did, da, 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 da. Like it's so just, just recognizing that you can ask about boundaries, I think is
Yeah.
something that most people don't really recognize,
Yeah.
too, just because it is such a heavy word,
Yeah.
even if it's an actual boundary.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And also like even if it's like someone is sharing their boundaries with you, that, before the boundary gets crossed,
Yeah, you can ask.
you can ask like, oh, why is that a boundary for you? Like, what about that makes you uncomfortable? Or you can also say things like, oh, like that doesn't really work for me.
Mhm.
Like if, for example, like the oral sex one, where it's just like, oh, like if that's a boundary for you, like that doesn't really work for me
Mhm.
because I want to do that with other people. And so what can we do about that? Like, can we have a conversation around that? Like, I'm curious why that's a boundary for you,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. And I think the other thing with boundaries that also gets weaponized, or just this idea about it, is that people like really dig their heels in and hold strong to boundaries. And like being with yourself, if you're the one that has this boundary, or says you have this boundary, sets this boundary, whatever it is, like really also just being open to examining that, on on enough of a basis where, because boundaries change. I think that's the other, like that's the thing that people think,
Right.
oh, boundaries can't change, like that's why I'm going to dig my heels in on it. But it's like a boundary that worked for you last year isn't necessarily a boundary that will work for you this year, or
Right.
a boundary that worked for you last week isn't necessarily mean it's a boundary that is for this week. And so letting those boundaries be flexible in the sense of you can change them, you can remove them, you can tweak them and adjust them in different ways. And so, someone asking you about a boundary is not them saying you're wrong or you shouldn't have this boundary or anything. Like it's more just an invitation to be able to look at it for yourself, with your partner or whoever it is, so that it can be, actually genuine for yourself. And then that way, that's what you're communicating, right? And so then that's what the person can handle or not handle. If it's still like, yeah, that boundary doesn't work for me. You leaving the room if I'm yelling doesn't work for me because I need to yell without like in the hard and it's like, okay, well, that doesn't work for me, right? But that's a genuine boundary of mine. Okay, well, now we need to reevaluate all of this, because how are we going to have hard conversations if only you can only yell, right?
Right.
Like, and I mean, I've heard that from people where they're like, no, like it's mostly cisgender men that are like, no, like I should be able to yell, da 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 da, and then I won't have these conversations with you then, and da 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 da. And it's like, okay, well, so someone's always going to cross your boundary. You're going to always remove yourself from the conversation, which means you're not going to have the conversation. Like, what is going to happen in this relationship?
Right.
Right. And so it's just being able to talk about it is like for the health of you, for the health of the relationship. And
Mhm.
sometimes the health of the relationship means there is no relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so that was a breakdown of boundaries and weaponizing of boundaries that we did in what, 35 minutes or
Hmm.
something like that. And like people literally study and help people with boundaries like for a living.
Oh yeah.
So So there, and if this is something that you want to explore more, this is also something that Lee and I help people with in our program as
Hmm.
well, like I said earlier on in the episode. So if this is something that you want further help with, that we're here for that. So please, you can book a call with us
Hmm.
in the description below. You can just scroll down, book a call with us, and have a conversation about what you're dealing with and if it works if what you're dealing with works to work with us
Hmm.
in that capacity. We would be happy to have that conversation with you. Anything else you want to share?
Don't think so.
Okay.
Keep it short and sweet.
Yeah. All right. Well, we love you. Welcome to the new Queer Love podcast, formerly the Queer and Poly podcast. Welcome, welcome.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
We love you.
Love you. Bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Queer Love Podcast. We would love to hear from you. Drop us a line on TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter at Queer Love Relationships, or email us at queerloverelationships@gmail.com.
If you are interested in working with us, follow the Linktree link in the show notes. See if our offers resonate with you. And if they do, sign up with us or book a discovery session.
We are so grateful that you're here, listening, learning, and growing with us.
Until next time, keep loving.